The Soviet westward offensive of 1918–1919 was part of the general move of the Russian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic into areas abandoned by the Ober-Ost garrisons that were being withdrawn to Germany following that country's defeat in World War I. The Soviet Western Front offensive against the Republic of Estonia ended in stagnation on the borders of the state. The offensive in the Vistula River direction by the newly created Western Army had the aim of establishing Soviet governments in Belarus, Ukraine and Poland, and to drive as far west as possible and potentially join up with the German Revolution. The campaign eventually led to the Estonian Pskov offensive, the White Russian Petrograd offensives, and the Polish-Soviet War. Background: after signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Bolshevik Russia lost the European lands it annexed in the 18th and 19th centuries. Most of today's Poland, Belarus, Ukraine and the Baltic states were granted to the government of Germany, which in turn decided to grant these states limited independence as buffer states. The German army started a retreat westwards. Demoralized officers and mutinous soldiers abandoned their garrisons en masse and returned home. The areas abandoned by the Central Powers became a field of conflict between local governments created by Germany as part of its plans. Local governments that sprung up after the withdrawal of the Germans, Poland, and the Bolsheviks wanting to incorporate these areas into Bolshevik Russia. Belarusian, Estonian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian and even Cossack national governments were formed. Internal power struggles prevented any of the governments in Belarus from gaining lasting power. In Ukraine the situation was even more complex, with an ongoing conflict between Makhno's anarchists, communists, the White Movement, various governments of Ukraine and the reborn Polish army. The entire region abandoned by the German forces became a gigantic free-for-all theater, where dozens of factions competed for power. The Bolsheviks were also implementing a new strategy, revolution from abroad, based on an assumption that revolutionary masses desire revolution but are unable to carry it out without help from more organized and advanced Bolsheviks. Hence, as Leon Trotsky remarked, the revolution should be brought on bayonets, as, through Kiev leads the straight route for uniting with Austro-Hungarian revolution, just as through Pskov and Vilnius goes the way for uniting with German revolution. Offensive on all fronts. Offensive on the West Front, offensive on the South Front, offensive on the all-revolutionary fronts. The concept was developed in 1918 but officially published under that name first in 1920 from the capital Tallinn. The local Bolsheviks declared the Estonian Workers' Commune in Narva. In South Estonia, the 49th Red Latvian Rifle Regiment took the railway junction of Valga on 17 December and the city of Tartu on December 24. The Estonian army stopped the 7th Red Army's advance along the entire front on 2 to 5 January. 2 days later, Estonian forces began the counter-offensive to expel the Soviet forces from Estonia. A Finnish volunteer Marine Brigade landed in the rear of the 6th Red Division, and the 1st Estonian Division captured Narva on 18 January. Subsequently, the northeastern front stabilized along the Narva River. In South Estonia, the Estonian commando-type Tartumaa Partisan Battalion drove the Red Latvian Rifle Regiments out of Valga on 31 January. The 7th Red Army was temporarily forced out of the boundaries of Estonia. On 16 February the Red Army started a counter-offensive to recapture Estonia. The newly formed Estonian Red Army gained the Setomaa, Vastseliina and Rapina parishes by 15 March. The Estonian 2nd Division counterattacked and regained Petseri by 28 March. Similar combat took place between the Estonian army and the northern group of the Latvian Red Army along the Ainazi-Strenši-Alaliksna front stabilized in northern Latvia. In the positions along the Narva River, the Estonian 1st Division repelled 7th Red Army attacks. Polish direction. The newly formed Red Army was growing in personnel, and Vladimir Lenin could gather enough strength to replace withdrawing Western Curtain forces by solid military and retake the lands lost by Russia in 1917 by simply following the withdrawing German army. Upon receiving the news about the German Revolution, on November 13, 1918, the Soviet government annulled the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and issued orders to the Red Army to move in the direction of Belarus, Ukraine and the Baltic states in order to establish Soviet governments there. The move of the newly created Western Army that started at night of November 17, 1918, in the operational vacuum created by the withdrawing German army, in the genial direction of Belarus, Ukraine and Poland, according to N. Davies, was codenamed Target Vistula. On January 5, 1919, the Red Army entered Minsk almost unopposed, putting an end to the short-lived Belarusian People's Republic. At the same time, Polish and Belarusian self-defense units sprung up across western Belarus. Ill-equipped and composed mostly of local recruits, they were determined to defend their homes from what the newspapers described as a Red Menace. Similar Bolshevik groups were operating in the sector and a series of skirmishes ensued. The Polish-Soviet struggle over Vilna in the first week of 1919 was a sign of things to come, as the Polish militia was forced to withdraw after the first organized units of the Soviet Western Army entered the city. In response, the Polish army started sending units eastwards to help the self-defense, while the Soviets did the same but in the opposite direction. Open conflict seemed inevitable. On January 12, Soviet High Command declared the goal of its Target Vistula operation deep scouting towards the Neman River. On February 12 that goal was updated to the Bug River. On that day Ducom's Vachetis ordered the new Western Command to carry out a reconnaissance in depth, as far as Tilsit, Brest-Litovsk, Kowl and Roun, disambiguation needed. He also ordered the securing of main railway junctions, including those in Wilno, Lida, Baranovica and Lunanets. Among the aims of the Bolsheviks was to drive through Eastern and Central Europe and support the revolutions in Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Bolshevik Russian forces did not anticipate serious opposition on the way and saw the states of Poland, Belarus and Lithuania as mere ephemerides, unable to defend their own temporary borders. However, it is unlikely that the Soviets really expected to reach the Vistula. The military orders were full of propaganda. The main goal of the operation was likely to see how much territory could be opportunistically grabbed in the chaotic governmental flux caused by the after effects of WWI in Europe ceased before any serious independent governing authorities arose. Finally, the first Polish-Soviet clashes happened in the area of the towns of Berezovka and Mostar, disambiguation needed, where both armies clashed in a series of skirmishes. The Bolshevik offensive came to a halt by late February and it became apparent that the Red Army would not break through the Polish lines by half-hearted attacks. Both the Soviet offensive and the Polish counterattack started at the same time, which resulted in an increasing number of troops being brought to the area. In April the Bolsheviks captured Grodno and Wilno, but were soon pushed out by the Polish counteroffensive. Aftermath. The Estonian and Polish armies proved to be far more difficult opponents than the Red Army had assumed. The PSKOV offensive of the Estonian Petseri battle group destroyed the Estonian Red Army, captured PSKOV and expelled Soviet forces from the territory between Estonia and the Velika Yar River on 25 May. The 7th and 15th Red Armies began a counter-offensive in Ingra and in the north of PSKOV in July 1919, which regained most of the lost territories of Petrograd and the northern PSKOV regions. With weapons provided by Britain and France and operational support by the Estonian Army and the Royal Navy, the White Russian Northwestern Army began the offensive Operation White Sword on 28 September 1919 with the aim of capturing Petrograd. The Northwestern Army approached to within 10 miles of the city, but the 7th Red Army repulsed the White Russian troops, driving them back into Estonia. Although the orders for the Target Vistula operation were never withdrawn, Russian plans were soon made obsolete by growing Polish resistance and eventually by the Polish counter-offensive in April. Unable to accomplish their objectives, the Red Army withdrew from their positions and started a reorganization. The Polish-Soviet War had begun. Analysis. The best-known comprehensive historical analysis of the campaign against Poland was performed by Norman Davies in his book White Eagle, Red Star. Davies mentioned the code name for this offensive, Target Vistula. However, it is not commonly used in historiography.